Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. At 5:23 a.m., the gates of hell rattled, only it was my front fence and a cop's flashlight slamming against it. "Sir, step outside," they barked. I grabbed my jeans, my boots, and my instincts. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a neighborly complaint. I woke up to the sound of metal rattling, like someone was shaking the gates of hell itself. For a moment, I thought it was the wind. Sonoma mornings could be nasty. But then came the thud of a flashlight against my front gate and a loud voice yelling, "Sir, step outside! This is the police!" I squinted at the clock on the nightstand. 5:23 in the morning. Not exactly the hour for casual visits. I pulled on jeans and boots, still half asleep, and stepped out onto the porch with a flashlight in one hand and my old prosecutor instincts in full alert mode. Two police cruisers idled at the end of my driveway, red and blue lights flashing over the rows of grapevines like a carnival gone wrong. Two officers stood by the gate, one older, built like a brick wall, and the other a rookie with the look of a man who hadn't finished his first cup of coffee. The older one called out, "Mr. Harris McLean?" I nodded, opening the gate just enough for them to see my face. "I'm Sergeant Lewis. This is Officer Gomez. We received a call from the Sunrise Glade Homeowners Association regarding a complaint about illegal occupation of community land. They said you were refusing to register your property under HOA jurisdiction. For a second, I thought I misheard. Illegal occupation. Register with the HOA. I ran a hand down my face, trying to wake up. "Sergeant, this is a farm. My farm. It's 110 acres of private agricultural land, purchased legally at a county auction 5 years ago. There's nothing illegal about it." He glanced down at his clipboard. "They said it's within the Sunrise Glade boundaries and that you're not in compliance with community standards." I almost laughed. "Community standards? You mean the people who live behind those manicured hedges half a mile east of here?" The rookie shifted uncomfortably. Lewis sighed, clearly aware this was nonsense, but bound by procedure. "We just have to deliver this notice, sir. After that, it's a civil matter." He handed me a crisp envelope stamped with the HOA logo and a name printed in bold, Karen Broxley, President. I tore it open right there under the headlights. The letter read like satire. "Mr. McLean, you are hereby directed to cease unlawful possession of land inconsistent with the bylaws of the Sunrise Glade community and report to the HOA office for registration and compliance review." It was signed with an elegant flourish, as if Karen had just annexed France. I looked up at the officers. "You realize this is absurd, right?" Lewis nodded slightly. "Between you and me, yes. But they called dispatch 3 times, insisted it was an active community disturbance." I went back inside, grabbed the deed from my office safe, and brought it out along with a certified copy of the property map. "Here," I said, spreading them on the hood of the cruiser. "County records, parcel number, date of purchase, notarized signatures. This land isn't, never was, and never will be part of Sunrise Glade." Gomez examined the papers, clearly realizing they'd been dragged into someone else's power trip. "Sir, this all looks in order. I'm not sure why they thought this was criminal." "Because they're used to bullying people who don't know the law," I muttered. "Tell your dispatch to note that I'm not under their jurisdiction and that if they call again, I'll consider it harassment." Lewis gave me a tight nod. "Understood, Mr. McLean. Sorry for the trouble." They left a few minutes later, the flashing lights fading down the road until the farm was silent again. I stood there for a while, barefoot in the gravel, holding that ridiculous notice in my hand. The horizon was just starting to lighten, painting the vines in pale blue and silver. I dealt with plenty of absurd cases back when I worked for the district attorney's office, but being accused of illegal ownership of my own farm by a homeowners association was a new milestone in idiocy. I went back inside, scanned the document for my records, and sent a message to my old colleague, attorney Linda Chang. "Linda," I wrote, "you ever seen an HOA try to conscript private farmland at 5 in the morning? By the time the sun climbed over the hills, I already had my coffee brewing, my security footage downloading, and the beginnings of a headache that told me this wasn't going to end with one letter." By the next afternoon, the sun was beating down hard enough to bake the gravel in my driveway when a silver SUV pulled up to the gate. Out stepped a woman in an immaculate beige suit and sunglasses big enough to block out common sense. I didn't need an introduction. The logo on her clipboard said it all: Sunrise Glade Homeowners Association, Karen Broxley, in the flesh. Behind her came two others, one wiry man in a pastel polo shirt holding a rolled blueprint, and a woman clutching a folder thick enough to pass for a tax code. A white pickup idled behind them, carrying a couple of workers in orange vests. Karen smiled like a senator greeting the cameras. "Mr. McLean, we're so glad we could catch you. We wanted to discuss a wonderful opportunity that benefits both you and the community." Her tone had that brittle politeness that always precedes a sales pitch or an arrest. I crossed my arms. "I'm listening, though I have a hunch I won't like it." She gestured toward the south fence line. "Sunrise Glade has approved a plan to expand our community walking trail. It would connect directly through this side of your property and provide scenic access to the hills. It's an environmentally friendly project supported by our residents. You'd just need to sign a brief agreement to join the HOA. In return, you'll receive annual compensation for shared land use. Think of it as passive income for doing nothing." I almost laughed. That's an interesting way to describe losing ownership of private land. Let me make this perfectly clear. Ms. Broxley, this is a farm, not a park, not a community trail. I'm not joining your association, and I'm not renting my land for your vanity project. The man beside her, Todd something, chimed in. "We already voted, sir. The community wants this. The residents' consensus has weight." I gave him a slow look. "And the Constitution outweighs your consensus. So unless you've got a court order or divine mandate, you're trespassing." Karen's smile tightened, but she kept her tone sugary. "There's no need for hostility. We simply believe in integration. Our bylaws encourage adjacent properties to become part of our community fabric." I stepped closer to the fence. "Your bylaws stop where my property line begins. That fabric ends here." She tried one more angle. "You might want to reconsider. These agreements can be beneficial, reduced taxes, improved infrastructure." I cut her off. "Lady, I worked in the district attorney's office for 15 years. I know a coercive land grab when I see one. Take your committee and leave before I call the sheriff." She stiffened. "You'll regret this." "We always find a way to make cooperation happen." Then she turned on her heel and marched back to the SUV, heels crunching like gunshots on the gravel. The workers climbed into their truck and followed her out, but not before I caught one of them eyeing my southern boundary with a measuring tape in hand. I had a bad feeling. 3 days later, I woke up to the sound of engines rumbling. When I reached the back field, I saw fresh orange stakes driven into the ground every few yards, a concrete curb laid along the edge, and a small bulldozer parked by the creek. The stakes bore the HOA logo like a scar on my land. My first reaction wasn't anger, it was disbelief. They were actually doing it. I took photos from every angle, recorded timestamps, and called the county sheriff. Deputy Hawthorne arrived half an hour later, chewing gum like he'd been through this before. He walked the line, examined the stakes, and sighed. "Looks like they came in overnight." They told dispatch it was a community improvement project. I handed him the documents from the previous visit. "You see the boundary markers? This is private property. They had no authorization." He nodded. "We'll file a trespassing report. But these HOA folks have lawyers. They'll claim misunderstanding." "Then I'll make sure there's no misunderstanding left," I said, already dialing Linda Chang's number. She picked up instantly. "They moved equipment onto your land?" "Yes, and they planted their little flags like conquistadors. I want to hit them with trespass, property damage, and harassment." "Document everything," she said. "Photos, timestamps, any identifying marks on their vehicles. I'll start drafting a cease and desist tonight." By sunset, I'd installed 2 new trail cameras, welded a temporary gate at the southern entrance, and posted bright red, "No trespassing," private property signs every 20 feet. I also hung one just for Karen right at eye level. This is not Sunrise Glade. Somewhere behind the oak trees, I could hear the hum of their golf carts patrolling the other side of the line. For the first time, the air around the farm didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a siege waiting to happen. By the time the next week rolled around, the situation had gone from ridiculous to dangerous. Early Monday morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox stamped with the official seal of the county zoning department. For a brief moment, I assumed it was some form of confirmation that the sheriff's office had processed my trespassing complaint. Instead, what I found inside made my blood run cold. The letter accused me of violating agricultural zoning ordinances, something about inconsistent land use, and unapproved modifications to property boundaries. Attached was a digital map of my parcel downloaded from the county GIS system. Only it wasn't my parcel anymore. The southern 11 acres of my farm were shaded in pale green and labeled Sunrise Glade Common Land Easement. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the paper, the coffee in my mug turning cold. Someone had actually altered the official county registry to make it look like I'd given away part of my land. That wasn't just audacity, it was criminal forgery. I called the zoning office immediately. The clerk on the other end sounded unsure. "It says here you signed a voluntary inclusion form 3 months ago," she said. "We received the scanned document with your digital signature." "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I didn't sign anything. I didn't even know there was such a form." She hesitated. "Well, it's in the file. The applicant listed was the Sunrise Glade Homeowners Association. Maybe check with them." I hung up before my blood pressure could make headlines. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. I answered, already expecting the devil. "Mr. McLean." The syrupy voice came through loud and confident. "This is Karen Broxley, president of the Sunrise Glade HOA. I understand there's been some confusion about the paperwork. We went ahead and filed the inclusion so we could move forward with our community trail. You'll be glad to know the county approved it." I gripped the phone tighter. "You forged my signature, Karen." She let out a little laugh, the kind you hear from someone who's used to getting away with things. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just a formality. Once you sign the actual membership agreement, it'll all line up. We even calculated your reduced property tax rate. You'll thank us once you see the benefits." Lady, if you think falsifying county documents is a formality, you're about to learn what a felony looks like. There was a pause. Then her tone hardened. "You might want to reconsider your attitude. We've already submitted reports to the county tax office that your land is being used for commercial leasing. Those new fences, the cameras, the gate installations. They qualify as income-producing structures. You may lose your agricultural exemption." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there, phone buzzing in my hand, listening to the silence. It wasn't just about property lines anymore. She was attacking me through the system, using bureaucracy like a weapon. By noon, I had driven straight into town to meet with Linda Chang. Her office smelled of coffee and printer ink, and she had already pulled up the zoning files on her laptop. "You weren't kidding," she said, scrolling through the documents. "They uploaded a scanned signature with your name. Sloppy, though. The timestamp metadata doesn't match the notarization date. I can get this torn apart in minutes." She started drafting letters before I even finished explaining. "We'll send a cease and desist directly to the HOA, file a complaint with the sheriff for document forgery, and notify the tax office that any claim against your exemptions is fraudulent. They're not just trespassing, they're manufacturing paper trails to steal your land." Back at the farm, I spent the rest of the day checking my cameras, saving backup copies to cloud storage, and printing every piece of evidence I had. I even scanned the forged document Karen mentioned, pulling the embedded metadata that proved the digital signature wasn't mine. Years in prosecution had taught me one thing: paperwork wins wars. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, I spotted a white SUV parked half-hidden behind the tree line near the southern border. It was the same model Karen drove. When I walked toward it, the engine started and backed away slowly down the road. I smiled grimly. She knew I was watching now, and she was about to learn that I don't scare easily. I have this habit of not leaving things half-finished. When someone tries to rewrite public records in the dead of night, my old prosecutor self wakes up and refuses to let it lie. I started by going back through every filing I could get my hands on at the county recorder's office. Paper ledgers, scanned PDFs, the old microfiche that looks like relics from a different century. I called in a favor with an old colleague who still works in maps and records and asked him to run a cross-check of recent parcel amendments around Sunrise Glade. What I found made my stomach drop. There were 3 parcels in the neighboring area, small farms and lone homesteads, that showed the same pattern as mine. In each case, the county registry suddenly listed part of the parcel as a community easement, and in each file there was a scanned voluntary inclusion with a signature and a stamped date. It wasn't subtle. Whoever did it left the same telltale. The document image had been scanned at the same terminal at roughly the same hour of the night, and the file names followed a neat sequence. 2 of the owners had been elderly, quick to panic when they got the notice. One had already been pressured into a meeting, signed a draft agreement that, in hindsight, was the setup for later paperwork. I pulled every email exchange, every scanned upload, every timestamp I could. Names repeated. The upload came, almost always, with a cover note listing the applicant as Sunrise Glade HOA, and the contact name from the HOA being the same handful of people I already knew. Then I found him. A clerk in the Land Records Office, David Reed. He appeared as the account that processed, or keyed in, several of the disputed records. A quick search showed familial ties between Mr. Reed and a couple of HOA board members. Small towns are good at keeping secrets. If those secrets involve somebody's cousin doing favors for a neighbor, I wrote down the chain. HOA files inclusion application. HOA member shows up with paperwork. Clerk David Reed keys the scanned signatures into the county GIS. County system updates. Notice goes out to the owner. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Whoever orchestrated it had learned how to make bureaucracy look like law. It was a cheap sleight of hand that would fool inspectors until someone actually pulled the metadata. I assembled a folder the way I used to assemble case files, neat, with exhibits clearly labeled. Exhibit A, the forged digital file for my parcel, with embedded metadata showing scan time and origin. Exhibit B, scans of the same origin for the other 3 parcels. Exhibit C, a PDF trail of emails from the HOA requesting expedited processing. Exhibit D, receipts and cash payment slips from one contractor who had been seen sloshing concrete along my southern border. Exhibit E, a transcript of my recorded phone call with Karen in which she implied the county had already signed things off. Then I started making calls that mattered. I drove to the county district attorney's office and asked to speak with the land fraud unit. I sat down with an assistant DA I knew from the old days and laid the whole thing out across his cramped conference room table. He read through a few pages, his face going from professional detachment to the kind of annoyance only someone who's seen his community lied to can register. "You have the beginnings of a pattern," he said quietly. "Wiring the records office, forging signatures, manufacturing tax claims. This isn't garden variety harassment. This could be organized theft." I also met with a reporter from the Sonoma Gazette, a sharp, impatient woman named Elena who didn't believe in ceremonial niceties. I figured the press would sharpen the county's appetite to act. I showed her the exhibits, pulled up camera footage on my phone of the orange stakes being driven in, and let her watch the clip of a contractor saying on a recorded line that he had been paid to mark things. She looked at the receipts and then at me. "You want me to run this?" she asked. "You have witnesses, you have metadata, and you have an audio that could be corroborated. This is a story." It wasn't just ego that made me nod, it was practical sense. Exposure complicates cover-ups. Between filings with the district attorney and evening phone calls with Elena, I also filed complaints with the State Department that oversees county record integrity and the tax board. I demanded immediate audit flags on any claim that my parcel had become commercial property. I requested a forensics review of the scanned documents and asked the county to freeze any changes pending an investigation. Linda started drafting a civil claim and an emergency injunction to keep the HOA and any contractors off of my land. She told me plainly, the harder they push in paperwork, the more they reveal their fingerprints. There were moments that felt petty in the middle of all this, standing in a dim county office, watching a clerk bring up a file that he had no right to. David Reed was pleasant enough when I introduced myself, sheepish like someone who'd been caught in a small lie that had grown into a monster. When I asked him verbatim who authorized the uploads, he stammered about instructions and a rush. He said the paperwork came in and he processed it. Under his breath, he mentioned a familiar name. I stored that conversation mentally as more fuel. By the end of the week, word had made its way. The DA's office had opened a preliminary inquiry. The county GIS people were running audit checks. Elena filed an initial piece that didn't name names yet, but asked sharp questions about how homeowners associations could be allowed to influence public registries. The attention put teeth in the paper trail. Men who had counted on anonymity suddenly found themselves somewhere they didn't want to be. People started calling the HOA with concerns. The farm felt less like a lone island and more like the epicenter of a ripple that would not stop. I walked the southern border at dusk, fingers trailing over the stakes that marked the line, thinking of the work ahead. You can bully a man with parties of 110 acres if he cannot organize proof. You can also, apparently, unsettle a neighborhood by showing how the sausage is made. I wanted the DA to have everything neat when they came. No loose ends, no excuses. That part of me, The part that once built murder cases from scraps liked the clarity of evidence. The rest of me, the farmer, wanted the tractors to just stop showing up. I knew things were going to get uglier once I took it public, but I underestimated just how fast ugliness could organize itself. Within days of the Sonoma Gazette article, my name was plastered across the Sunrise Glade Facebook page. A grainy photo of my farmhouse, clearly taken from the road, was pinned to the top with the caption, "Neighbor obstructing community progress, safety hazard to residents." They even used the word hazard like I was a sinkhole waiting to swallow their HOA. The comments section bloomed like mold. "He's unstable. He has cameras pointed at our trail. He's hoarding land that belongs to the community." By the third day, I stopped reading. Instead, I focused on what mattered, building an irrefutable case. Still, that didn't stop them from escalating offline. I started noticing cars I didn't recognize creeping along the dirt road that bordered my property. A few of them slowed just long enough for someone to snap pictures before driving off. One evening, as I was fixing a water line near the barn, I saw the glare of headlights down by the southern fence. By the time I got there, the car was gone, but someone had left a neat pile of concrete chunks and a flattened trail work ahead sign. Petty intimidation. It would have been funny if it weren't so rehearsed. The next morning, I walked out to find one of my new no trespassing signs twisted off its post and tossed into the ditch. I checked the security footage. There they were, 3 figures in hoodies, 2 of them wearing HOA volunteer vests. They strolled right up, posed for a selfie with my sign, and ripped it out. I sent the video straight to the sheriff and to Linda. Her reply came within minutes. "Perfect. Let them keep talking. Every stunt is more evidence." By midweek, Karen sent out a community-wide newsletter accusing me of aggressive behavior toward HOA members. She claimed I'd verbally threatened volunteers. She even added a line that made me snort coffee through my nose. "Mr. McLean's conduct has raised legitimate questions about his fitness to hold agricultural exemptions." Translation: they were trying to poison me with bureaucracy again. That night, while I was transferring files to Linda's secure drive, my phone rang. Unknown number. I picked up out of habit. A deep voice said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Then a click. No background noise, no breathing, just dead air. The next day, I called Deputy Hawthorne. He came out personally, looked over the new debris near the southern border, and shook his head. "They're pushing," he said, "but they're sloppy. Keep documenting. We've got your original complaint on file, and the DA's office is in touch with us now." That last part mattered. The district attorney's office had escalated the matter to a formal investigation. They were compiling witness statements, financial records, and, thanks to Elena's follow-up article, tips from other property owners. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd been strong-armed into joining the HOA. One family 2 miles east said the association threatened to cut off their access road unless they signed an agreement. Linda's office received a subpoena for my security footage, and soon after, a formal request for my testimony before the county inquiry board. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was a witness in a growing corruption case. Around that same time, Karen appeared at my gate again. No pretense this time, no smiles, no clipboard. Just a black sedan, 2 other HOA board members behind her, and that brittle, trembling confidence of someone realizing the script's starting to slip. She shouted through the bars, "You could have avoided all this if you'd just cooperated, Harris. You're ruining everything." I stepped closer, keeping my tone steady. "Karen, you've been trespassing, forging signatures, and slandering me online. The only thing I'm ruining is your little empire." Her jaw tightened. "You think the county's on your side? You have no idea who you're dealing with." I smiled thinly. "A desperate woman with a pending subpoena. I think I do." She turned red, sputtered something about community unity, then drove off so fast she nearly clipped her own mailbox. I caught the whole exchange on my front camera. By the end of that week, the Gazette ran another article. The headline read, "County investigates HOA over forged property records. Farm owner provides key evidence." It included a photo of Karen shaking hands with the same county clerk who'd approved my forged documents. It was the kind of image prosecutors dream of. Late that night, as I sat on my porch with a beer, I watched 2 sheriff's cruisers roll slowly past my gate. Routine patrols, Hawthorne told me earlier. That hum of protection felt good, but I knew it wasn't over. HOA bullies rarely retreat quietly. They regroup, they plot, they whisper to the right people, but this time they'd be whispering under a magnifying glass. The phone buzzed again. Linda texting me a single line. State Justice Department just requested all our files. They're taking this upstairs. I set the phone down, stared out across the dark fields, and exhaled slowly. The farm had gone from sanctuary to battleground, but at least now I wasn't fighting alone. The story had spread far beyond Sonoma by the time the first federal agent knocked on my door. I remember it vividly. A gray morning, fog clinging to the hills like wet linen, and a black SUV idling by the fence. 2 agents stepped out, one from the California Department of Justice, the other from the FBI's Property Crimes Division. They introduced themselves with professional calm and showed credentials that gleamed faintly in the mist. "We're following up on the Sunrise Glade HOA investigation," the senior one said. "We've received multiple complaints consistent with document fraud, forgery, and zoning manipulation. You've been listed as the primary reporting witness." For a second, it didn't feel real. I'd spent years in courtrooms watching cases like this unfold from the prosecutor's side, never imagining I'd be standing on the other end, a farmer in muddy boots handing over evidence to federal agents. I led them into the kitchen, cleared the table, and stacked the files I'd been compiling for weeks. Screenshots, metadata, notarized copies, and a neatly labeled flash drive. They worked silently for a while, cross-checking timestamps and scanning QR codes on their tablets. One of them, a young agent with a buzz cut, let out a low whistle. "They really tried to rewrite the county map," he muttered. The other, more senior, looked up at me. "Mr. McLean, this is bigger than just one homeowners association. We've identified at least 4 communities using similar methods across Northern California. Same signatures, same clerk involvement, same patterns of tax manipulation." It wasn't satisfaction I felt, more like a grim validation. I'd known they were playing dirty, but realizing it was part of a network gave the anger a new, sharper edge. The agents took my statements and promised to keep me updated. 2 days later, the first wave of search warrants went out. I didn't see the raids myself, but the footage made the evening news. Helicopter shots showed agents carrying boxes out of the Sunrise Glade HOA office, while county deputies stood guard at the door. A banner still hung across the front that read, "Community Integrity First." The irony was so thick you could spread it with a trowel. According to the reports, they found forged signatures on land transfer forms, HOA, board meeting minutes fabricated retroactively to justify annexations, invoices showing payments to contractors for boundary work on private property, and a ledger containing under-the-table payments to county employees, including David Reed. Elena from the Gazette called me that evening, excitement sharp in her voice. "They raided the clerk's office too," she said. "Reed's under arrest. They've tied him to at least 7 fraudulent land inclusions." "Good," I said. "Maybe he'll finally learn how to draw a line legally." But if Karen was rattled, she didn't show it. That same night, she appeared on the local evening news, a polished interview, standing in front of her house with crocodile tears in her eyes. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said. "Mr. McLean has waged a personal vendetta against our community. We only sought to beautify our shared environment." I didn't even finish watching. Linda sent me a message minutes later. "Don't respond publicly. Let the evidence talk." The next morning, I woke up to find my mailbox stuffed with anonymous letters, copies of HOA newsletters blaming me for destroying neighborhood harmony. Someone even mailed me a flyer reading "Greed Destroys Community." I kept them all bagged and tagged like evidence. A week later, the agents returned with updates. The investigation had expanded. Turns out several of the HOA board members had quietly invested in a development company planning to build an eco-recreation corridor right through the lands they were trying to seize. My farm had been the keystone of their plan. Without it, the project collapsed. The motive was money, always money. The agents took another round of statements, this time more detailed. They wanted exact dates, names, every recorded call. One of them asked if I'd be willing to testify should the case reach federal court. I didn't hesitate. "I've seen worse crooks wear better suits," I said. "Tell me when and where." By mid-September, the DOJ had frozen the HOA's accounts and subpoenaed their financial records. Sunrise Glade went silent. Their Facebook page vanished. The gates to their clubhouse locked. And for the first time in months, my road stayed empty at night. But peace was fragile. 2 days after the raid, I found fresh tire tracks leading up to my southern fence. The padlock had been clipped, but nothing taken. It It felt like a message, a reminder that bullies don't vanish quietly even when cornered. I replaced the lock, installed brighter floodlights, and emailed Linda. They're nervous. That's good. When I sat back down at my desk that night, the farm quiet around me, I realized something I hadn't in a long time. I wasn't afraid anymore. The system that had once looked like their weapon was now turning on them. And I'd built the case that made it happen. The knock came early, not at dawn like last time, but at a respectable 8 in the morning. I opened the door to see Deputy Hawthorne standing there with that tired grin of his, coffee in hand. "You might want to turn on the news," he said. "Big morning for your friends over in Sunrise Glade." I did, and there it was. Every local channel, every angle. Karen Broxley being led out of the HOA office in handcuffs, her blonde hair slightly windblown, her mouth frozen mid-protest. The Chiron read, "HOA president arrested on charges of fraud, forgery, and property theft." Behind her, 2 other board members were also being escorted out, faces pale, sunglasses useless against the glare of camera flashes. Even David Reed, the county clerk, appeared briefly on screen, head down as he was loaded into a black SUV. The footage cut to a press conference outside the county courthouse. The district attorney stood behind a row of microphones flanked by state investigators. Today's arrests marked the culmination of a 6-month joint investigation into fraudulent land annexations conducted under the guise of homeowners associations. Evidence indicates a coordinated scheme to manipulate zoning maps, forge signatures, and acquire private property without consent. I didn't realize I'd been gripping my coffee mug until my knuckles turned white. Relief, vindication, disbelief. They all came crashing together. For once, the law wasn't looking the other way. An hour later, my phone rang. "Linda." "They're processing charges right now," she said. 4 counts for Karen: forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and criminal trespass. The DA's office wants you as their first witness once the trial phase begins. "Happy to oblige," I said. I still have a few things I'd like to say to her, under oath this time. In the following days, reporters started calling. Everyone wanted a quote, a soundbite, a statement about how it felt to take down an HOA. I told them the truth. It wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. They twisted that into local farmer takes on corrupt HOA wins. Fine by me. The first hearing was surreal. I'd spent half my life in courtrooms, but sitting there as a witness was different, like being a ghost watching someone else's story unfold. Karen sat at the defendant's table in a pale suit, pretending calm, eyes darting toward me only once, full of venom and disbelief. Her lawyer tried to paint it as administrative confusion, claiming she had misunderstood jurisdictional boundaries. Linda handled cross-examination like a surgeon. She laid out each piece of evidence in order: the forged inclusion forms, the mismatched metadata, the contractor payments, and finally, the recording of Karen's voice saying, "Everyone does it. You're just making this difficult." When that line played over the courtroom speakers, the air went still. Even Karen's own attorney rubbed his forehead like he'd just watched a slow-motion train wreck. During recess, the district attorney approached me. "You did good work, Harris. Without your documentation, this whole case would have died in paperwork." I nodded. That's the irony of it, isn't it? Paperwork built their scheme. Paperwork tore it down. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed. Karen tried to keep her composure as reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Broxley, did you forge the documents? Was there collusion with county officials? Do you regret targeting private landowners?" She muttered something about false accusations before being ushered into a waiting car. As the weeks went on, the trial rolled forward like a slow storm. One by one, witnesses testified: contractors, clerks, homeowners who'd been pressured to sign voluntary agreements. Every testimony added another nail in the coffin. When my turn came, I walked to the stand, took the oath, and told the story from the beginning. The knock at 5:23 in the morning, the fake notice, the forged map, the concrete stakes on my field. I didn't need to dramatize anything. The absurdity spoke for itself. When it was over, I glanced at Karen. For the first time, she looked small. The confident suburban empress turned defendant, realizing the HOA banner she'd hidden behind had turned into her own noose. By the time the gavel came down on the preliminary ruling, she was already facing additional federal charges. Fraud wasn't just local anymore, it was statewide. And thanks to every photo, every timestamp, and every stubborn ounce of patience I'd invested, they had all the evidence they'd ever need. When I walked out of that courtroom, the autumn air hit me with the kind of clarity you can't fake. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing. Sunrise Glade was finished. The verdict came on a bright morning that smelled faintly of rain. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, locals, even a few former HOA members pretending they'd never voted for Karen. When the judge read the decision, his voice carried like thunder. The actions of the Sunrise Glade HOA were unlawful. The association was to be dissolved, all falsified documents voided, and restitution awarded to the victims. My name was first on the list. $410,000 in damages. Karen didn't look at me as deputies led her away. Her attorney whispered something about appeals, but it didn't matter. The system she'd built on arrogance and paperwork had collapsed under its own weight. Outside, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Reporters shoved microphones at me asking how it felt to win. I just said, "It feels like getting my land back." That seemed to shut them up. A month later, bulldozers arrived, not to invade this time, but to tear down the HOA's illegal border curbs and markers. I watched from my porch as the concrete broke apart piece by piece. The line between my farm and their neighborhood vanished back into dirt and grass just as it always should have been. The county sent an official letter of apology, and the state attorney announced new oversight laws for homeowner associations. My case had become a reference point, something they called the McLean precedent. It sounded grand, but I still spent my days fixing fences and tending vines. Fame doesn't harvest grapes. Before winter, I bought the adjoining parcel to the east, 50 more acres that once bordered Sunrise Glade. I posted a fresh sign at the gate, "Private land, never hose again." Sometimes, when the evening settles quiet and the barn lights hum against the hills, I think about how absurd it all began. A knock before dawn, a forged map, a woman drunk on self-importance. Now it's just me, my land, and the silence of a place finally left alone.